Andrew McCart, iFLTV, delighted as always to be joined by Mr. Dan Rafael. Dan, first and foremost, mate, how are you, my friend?
Doing all right. Still fighting a little bit of a chest cold, but I'll live.
That's that, like I said to you beforehand, before I pushed record. That's the main thing. As long
Yeah.
as you go, as long as you live. Yeah, it's been a while since I spoke to you, and I always enjoy our interviews because you give a US perspective on everything that's happening in the boxing world. Sometimes we can be tunnel visioned in the UK and we just worry about our fighters and whatnot and not what's happening in the US. But in saying that, I kind of want to stay in the UK if that's okay. I want to
Sure.
talk about this Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn fight, but I think I'll start with the press conference on Tuesday. That was there when the egg. I'm guessing you saw Chris Eubank smash an egg over Conor Benn's face. Now you've been in the sport long enough, Dan, that this is nothing new to you in terms of fight game.
Well, I've never seen anybody smash an egg in somebody's face. I've seen a lot of crazy shit at press conferences, but I've never seen the egg card played before. So there's always something new.
That's why we love the sport, Dan, because there's always we never know what's going to happen. Yeah, I just want to get your thoughts on it. Obviously, with Conor Benn, the failed drugs test, it was down to the eggs, clomiphene in the eggs, and that was the sort of the story that we were getting led down. And then the fact that Chris Eubank brought eggs into the press conference, and then casually just smashed it over his Conor Benn's face. I just want to get your thoughts to that. What did you think of it all?
Listen, I'm not big on that shit. I don't really care for that. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for guys want to shit talk with each other
Hmm.
and all that. And that's part of the sport. That'll always be part of the sport, and that gets fans excited. But I think you take it a bridge too far when you lay hands on the other guy, especially in that manner. It's one thing, and don't get me wrong, I'm not like saying you should go punch the guy or anything like that. But when you take a foreign object like that and you smash it across his face, like that could have been like really much more serious than just like a punch. Pieces of the egg get in the guy's eye or something like that. That it just, I don't know. I just thought it was bush league, unnecessary. There was going to be a ton of hype on this fight regardless. They want to get into a little pushing scuffle. I mean, whatever. But the egg was a little bit of that to me was a bridge too far.
They were saying that if a bit of a shell got into his eye, then the fight's done. Do you know what I mean? He's got a scratch in his
No,
eye.
you know what, Andrew? It's not even just that. And it's anytime this shit happens at press conferences where they start pushing and shoving and scuffling and this and that. You catch a guy by surprise like that. He takes a wrong step. He tweaks his knee and he
Mm.
blows out his ACL. Or he throws a punch back and he cracks his fist, he cracks his hand, or you crack your hand, and there's an injury or something like that. Or somebody, involved in the scrum gets injured. And that doesn't mean that the boxers are injured, but it certainly casts a pall over the event. But without question, one of the fighters could be injured. I mean, go back just not that even that long ago, a couple years ago. Remember when was it Canelo Alvarez was getting ready to fight Caleb Plant, and they threw punches at the beginning of the press conference, and Plant ended up with a cut.
Hmm.
It could have been a lot more serious. I mean, they were very fortunate that fight did not have to be postponed because of that. So, uh, what Eubank did was nothing new in terms of instigating some type of situation at a press conference. Using an egg was the new one for me.
Mm. And I think his sort of reasoning behind it was like you it's been 2 years, we still don't know the reason behind it. You blamed an egg and you cost me this, and you still it was a lot of reason that he said as to why he did it. But again, as you know, the media, we sort of again being in the media when that stuff happens, it's almost like we get excited about it. But like you say, there should be repercussions. And I don't know, I saw a headline with Eddie Hearn. I didn't see the interview with Stomping Ground and young Charlie Parsons. I think it was actually Oscar saying that there's going to be a penalty or a fine or repercussions or something like that for Chris Eubank for doing that. I guess you agree with that? He needs to be penalized in some way.
I would hope so. I mean, I don't know if it will happen.
Mm,
Uh, you know, that's really the only way that you can sometimes get through to the athletes is if you cost them money. I mean, because that's why they do this. It's prize fighting. I get that. So I haven't seen anything specific about that, but I did see the Connor make a comment or maybe something on his social media saying he's not going to press charges because that was honestly that's just straight assault. That's
yeah.
not in the context of a boxing match. That's not where you're protecting yourself, against an aggressor. That was you just out of nowhere, just deciding you're going to not only hit a guy in the face, but use a foreign object to do so. So certainly Conor Benn, if he wanted to, could have pressed charges. He's not going to do that, obviously. But, again, I get it that it hypes people up and everything, but I think a lot of people already hyped up for the fight, regardless of whether there was an egg involved. I think it would have probably done the trick if there was just even a little bit of pushing and shoving. You want to call me an old fuddy duddy, have at it. But, not my first rodeo. So honestly, that kind of stuff at press conferences bores me at this point after 25 years of doing this.
I won't call you an old fuddy buddy because I'm old as well. I agree with you. Dan, you said people are hyped about this fight. Again, it's two British fighters, and we know that the US market is huge, and you've got a lot of fighters over there. But are you hyped for this fight? Are you
Well,
personally hyped for this fight?
yeah, I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I mean, no doubt about it. I followed the whole saga of the drug test. I obviously, remember when their fathers fought each other, watched those fights. So they were obviously tremendous battles, and the sons carry on. Now, this is not at the same level of that in terms of the stakes. It's not a world title fight, but there is something to be said for sticking up for the family honor. And if your British boxing, that the Benn and Eubank names are connected forever. One of the great rivalries in the history of boxing in the United Kingdom. And so this is a meaningful fight from that perspective. I don't know if, I very much doubt that the fight resonates with most people in the United States. I mean, sure, the diehard boxing fans will probably be interested, but it's not a crossover type of fight here. Obviously in the UK, I saw reports there was like 100,000 plus people in the queue trying to get tickets for the stadium in London. In this country, it cause a ripple. But it shouldn't, because they're not from here. They don't fight here, although they have fought here, but not in major events. And this is the ultimate British rivalry fight. It's not a U.S. rivalry fight.
I do want to sort of piggyback off that, but I want to get your thoughts quickly. You've in the US as well. You've dealt with rehydration clause back in the Mayweather day, Tank Davis, Garcia.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's a £10 rehydration clause for Chris Eubank Jr. of the day to fight.
Well, Andrew, it's both guys. Both guys have to. Now, nobody's worried about Conor being above 10 pounds, but both guys got to do that weight check on the morning of the bout.
Well, Conor walks around at in British sort of money, if you want to call it, 12 stone, which is probably, I think 12 stone is 171 or 72 pounds. And then he has to weigh 170 pounds?
So yeah, I mean, listen, the fight is contracted at 160.
Yeah.
They have to weigh in at the weight check the following morning at no more than 170. I was only making the point that it is not only Eubank that's got to weigh in. I don't think anybody's concerned that Ben won't be able to make the 170, but there are people that question whether it will be a problem for Eubank, and if it is, how much will he be depleted by it? And the main thing, though, is if he's over the 170, and this will be something he'll have to contemplate with his team about how hard it is for him to make it after the weight. They're going to weigh in. I assume he'll make 160, which he's done many times. And keep in mind, when this fight was scheduled 2.5 years ago, before it got canceled because of the failed drug test, it was actually contracted at 157. So he got an extra 3 pounds on the weight, on the weigh-in day. Now it's 170 at the weight check. And he'll have to determine if he's having the trouble, do I blow the weight and pay the money, or am I going to stick by what I promised on the contract and make the 170 on the morning of the fight? Because if he doesn't make the weight, it's my sources tell me it's $500,000 per pound over. And it's not like if he's 171, it's 500,000, but it's nothing if he's 170.3. It's if you're over 170, it's 500. If you're over 171, even if it's a fraction, let's say, it's another 500. So there's very significant financial penalties in this fight for the missing of the weight on the morning of the weight, the weight check on the morning of the fight.
You mentioned it's not a crossover fight in terms of the diehard fans in the US will watch it. You're a diehard fan, so I'm guessing you'll watch it. But it's interesting to me that Turki Al-Sheikh said a couple of days ago that the winner of this fight will face Canelo in 2026. Obviously, Canelo's got 2 fights this year against Skull, and fingers crossed, sounding good, that's going to be Canelo and Crawford in September. Now, all going well for Canelo, gets past these 2 fights this year. Does Canelo versus Ben or Canelo versus Chris Eubank Jr., is that the crossover fight that can bring the British and US market together?
Probably not. But if you listen to what Turki has been talking about, that fight, the fights that he would have in 2026, whoever the opponents are, supposedly are ticketed for Riyadh. In other words, out of the 4 fights that Canelo is supposedly going to have with Riyadh season, one of them will be in the United States. That will be the fight against Terence Crawford. Obviously, that's where it belongs in Las Vegas because it's a humongous fight. But the William Skull fight and whatever the 2 bouts he would do in 2026, supposedly it will take place in Riyadh. So if he goes to Riyadh and he fights the winner of this fight at some point, it won't really make that much of a difference in terms of the American market. Now, remember, before he signed to do the fight against Edgar Berlanga, The only other fighter that was even in the conversation, from what I understand, I reported about this extensively at the time, was Chris Eubank. And ultimately, he didn't get the fight, and they ended up doing the fight against Berlanga, and we saw what happened there. So now, Eubank has moved on with his career doing this fight with Conor Benn. Now, he's fought many fights at super middleweight during his career. So the notion of Chris Eubank, if he were to defeat Conor and then go back to 168 and challenge Canelo Alvarez for his titles, that would not be crazy, I don't think, to many people, because he'll have gotten a win over Ben, and he is not a he's a legit guy at 168 when he's fought there. I question, though, whether it's one thing for Terence Crawford, one of the great fighters of boxing in history and certainly of today's times, to go from his last fight where he won a title at 154 and challenge at 168 for Canelo's title. It's, to me, a totally different matter to have a guy that's been a career welterweight with 2 fights at junior middleweight, but against really lesser opposition, never had a really, truly big win at welterweight. I mean, never won a world title, never was the European champion, never was the British champion, never was the Commonwealth champion. I mean, he's got a great name, and I'm not knocking Conor for what he has done. He's knocked out guys like Chris Algieri, former world champion, and has some other okay wins. Although those wins, I think some people might question the knockouts given his PED situation. But nonetheless, I think there'd be a lot less believers, let's say, if he were to go from this fight at middleweight after never having fought at middleweight and eventually fighting Canelo at super middleweight. That would be viewed as even more of a mismatch than if he were to fight against Chris Eubank at super middleweight. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, but we are hearing that we've done maybe 5 or 6 interviews in the last year, let's say. And I think every single interview we've spoke about Canelo and Crawford. And will it happen? Won't it happen? Maybe it'll happen this time. Oh, it's not happening. Looks like it's happening.
That's a true mega fight. I mean, that's a mega fight.
Yeah.
It's gonna. I mean, as long as he beats Skull, that fight will happen, and that's a huge fight because their names. I believe this very strongly. It's without question the biggest fight you could make in boxing in North America. Obviously, Canelo's Mexican, but a Mexican who fights most of the fights, or at least he's going to be fighting in Saudi Arabia in the future, I guess, but primarily has fought in the United States for the last 15 years or so. And so he against Crawford, that's the kind of fight where they'll have, a full house at the T-Mobile Arena, and the gate will be, $25 million just in ticket sales. It will do a robust number on pay-per-view, and that will be that. But Crawford is the kind of fighter who's got the background where I think, even if you don't think he's necessarily going to win the fight, I think people understand it's not like it's not a crazy kind of match for, one of the best fighters in boxing to take that gamble to move up a couple of weight divisions against a fighter in Canelo who's still a top-notch fighter. But I think anybody that's watched his fights over the last, year or two would say he's still tremendous, but he's not at his top level anymore. That while still a bona fide, top 10 pound for pound caliber fighter, where for a long time he was number one, now he's probably, down 5, 6 in that ballpark. Age takes its toll. Now he's younger than Terence Crawford, but has a lot more mileage on his odometer because he turned professional as a teenager and has had 60 plus professional fights and been in a lot of high contact fights, whereas Crawford, a little bit older, hasn't been in those types of wars that Canelo has been. So he might be fresher, even though he's been less active. He's only been fighting essentially once per year over the last, 3 or 4 years. So, there'll be a lot of intrigue in that fight. That'll be a fight in America. Probably will gain some mainstream attention by television and radio and newspapers that don't typically cover boxing other than the biggest fights that there are. The fact that it's in the United States is obviously a big factor because when we have huge mega fights, Tyson Fury against Alexander Usyk. I'll give you just one example. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. That's the heavyweight championship of the world. I mean, that's a big deal. I get the Washington Post. Can't say, I look for it. I can't say I saw a single word about that fight in the Washington Post. The heavyweight championship of the world doesn't get one line in a major, it's one of the biggest, most important papers in the entire United States, and they didn't have one sentence. Crawford and Canelo, I'm not their sports editor, but I'd be willing to bet you any amount of money that there'll be stuff in that paper about that fight. And that's the difference between a mega fight taking place in the United States and a mega fight that doesn't take place in the United States. That in our market, it's something that the media here pays more attention to.
Is it because there's there's no US fighter. Tyson Fury's British, Usyk is Ukraine. Is it because American or the American sort of market is looking at it as if to say we're not bothered about that because there's no American on there?
Well, I mean, I'm
They
not
won't
saying
cover
they
it.
got to write 10 stories about it. I'm talking about, 2 paragraphs in a roundup saying that they did a weigh-in, or, you know, 4 sentences with the result the day after the fight. You can't even now. A lot of the excuses for some of the media in the United States for not having results of important fights in the paper after the fact is because they end too late on the East Coast. They end really, really late at night when the deadlines for these publications for their print editions are way earlier. Can't make that excuse about a Saudi Arabia fight where they're 8 hours behind us, rather, I'm sorry, 8 hours ahead of us, I should say, and the boxing match is over, by 7 o'clock at night, still within the opportunity to put it in the paper. I'm only making the point that it's still the heavyweight championship of the world, and they cover other international events also. But a Canelo Crawford fight will, in my opinion, and I guess will be proven out in a few months when they finally get in the ring, that there will be coverage of that fight. But when you fight these fights in Saudi Arabia, there isn't going to be coverage, and it's exacerbated by the fact that there's no Americans involved. We're talking about a huge card like we all just saw this past Saturday with Beterbiev and Bivol in the rematch. All kinds of interesting fights on that card. And I can't say I saw one word in mainstream media in the United States. Nothing, anything, zero, zip, zut, nada.
Is that maybe because is that an American problem then? Because surely a fight like a Bivol and a Beterbiev should really grasp the imagination of a sport. I mean, you've got two unbelievable fighters. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, we again, this is for me as a kid growing up. We always used to have the Vegas shows, and we had to stay up till 6 a.m. in the morning to watch the Vegas shows. That's because we're fans, and the British fans, we love boxing, but we embraced that. And then now, obviously, the market is shifting to more global. It's not just a US market. There's more British, and then you've got the Saudis. Do you think
The,
now we could just
they
all
they just don't. The sports editors of the publications across America primarily don't care. To my, as far as I can tell, I don't think there's a single newspaper in the United States that has a dedicated boxing writer anymore. When I first started, now there was lots of boxing writers who also may have covered other sports in addition to covering the boxing beat. A lot of guys doubled up and they covered maybe boxing, but they also did some football or they covered other stuff as well.
Yeah.
But now I don't think there's a dedicated boxing writer at any paper in this country. And I say that as somebody that was a dedicated boxing writer at a major newspaper in this country. When I started, this, I worked for the biggest paper in the United States of America. I worked as the national boxing writer for USA Today. We covered fights. I covered fights all over the place. I went to fights, all around for the 5 years I was there before I went and left and went to ESPN. My point is the landscape of the media is different. And the biggest fights don't get coverage in the United States unless it's in the United States, involves a American fighter, or let's say and Canelo Crawford is that level because Crawford is an American fighter, but Canelo is the biggest star in boxing, at least on this side of the planet.
As an American sports writer, Dan, does that frustrate you? The
Yeah,
fact
it's embarrassing.
Right, okay.
Again, and keep in mind, I am not saying, so I want to be clear. I'm not saying I expect them to send 3 writers to the fight and write columns and stories every day. I'm talking about like literally one pre-fight story, a couple paragraphs in a roundup of other stuff, maybe the result, in an AP story or a small roundup. That's not exactly like you're asking for the moon. I'm talking about the most cursory, basic coverage you would offer the event. I get the fact they're not going to go spend resources on that. I mean, shit, when there's fights in Washington, for example, I'm using the Washington Post as an example because it's my home paper. They'll cover the fight, but they don't really give it a tremendous amount. When like Gary Russell or Gary Antoine Russell is going to fight this weekend, I'm hopeful that they'll have something about his fight in the paper. Maybe a pre-fight story later this week. When Gary Russell, his brother, would fight, they would cover those fights, have something in there, but that's because he was a local fighter. But, God forbid they do it on the international or the national level.
Again, I've been to America a few times to cover boxing, and again, in the UK, we've got football, rugby, and boxing. In the US, you do have American football, basketball, ice hockey, soccer now with the MLS.
Well, we've had that. We've had that for decades, and nothing's changed there.
Where does boxing rank? If you obviously American football, basketball is way up there, baseball as well. Where does boxing rank on the list? You believe?
I don't even think it's in the. It's a way. I mean, you got American football, baseball, NBA basketball, college football, NHL. You got lots of coverage of the WNBA, women's college basketball, you have auto racing, tennis, golf tour, boxing. That again, I reiterate, in the United States where there's papers all over the place, even though a lot of them are struggling, they don't give a shit about boxing for the most part. You just don't see it. Once in a while, you might see something. I would hope that with Tank Davis fighting Saturday in Brooklyn, New York, that maybe the New York Post, which if anybody's going to write about boxing, the New York Post might write the occasional story. I would hope there'd be a pre-fight story about the card in the New York Post. Perhaps, God forbid, they actually cover the fight on the night when it's taking place in their city. It's not like there's a packed sports schedule this weekend in New York. By no means. It would seem logical. It doesn't cost money to go and do that. They're right there in the city. So we'll have to wait and see. But it's the landscape of American boxing media is pathetic. And that's frankly one of the reasons why I'm able to make a living on my Substack newsletter, because if you are a boxing fan and you want coverage of the sport, you can go to an independent outlet like myself.
Link in description, guys.
Yeah, there you go. And I'm just not touting my own stuff. I'm talking about there's other websites that are dedicated to boxing that you can go look at for coverage also. So if you are a diehard fan, there's still ways to get stories, information, all that kind of business. But the thing about the mainstream papers, if you want to read about boxing, yeah, you might come and find my Substack and subscribe to it. Or you might go on, the Ring Magazine website or Boxing Scene or Fight News or any of the various websites that cover the sport. But the thing that helps build the sport is if you're sitting, and I know this may be archaic, but there's still lots of people that actually go and look at their newspaper, the physical print copy, or even on the website of their local paper. And you might open the sports section. Let's say you want to read about the basketball game or the football game, but you run across a story about boxing. You might read that. Now, I find it very interesting when I can sit down with my newspaper, because I still get 2 newspapers delivered to my house every day, is you read stories that you might not otherwise think that you're going to go search out. Like, yeah, of course, I'm always going to look for the story about the thing I'm interested in. But when you're flipping the pages and you see something that catches your eye, it might make you read that. And that happens sometimes with stories, whether it's about boxing or some other aspect. Could be anything. Could be some local news story, politics, religion, the movies, whatever it is. And that's what lacks here. You're going to have nobody in America who's not purposely looking for boxing being able to find something about boxing, because the papers just don't cover it anymore.
Again, it's a shame, and I'm glad you're still doing your thing for the sport, Dan. But again, let's talk about them, because you mentioned Tank Davis and Shakur Stevenson out in Saudi, because he was an American fighter out there. Now, I'll probably just ask this question and just let you ramble a little bit here. Talk to me about.
I hope I'm not rambling.
No. I want you to ramble on this. The Tank Davis, Lamont Roach fight, Shakur Stevenson, Josh Padley fight, and talk to me about Tank Davis and Shakur Stevenson. Will it happen?
I mean, who knows? I mean, hopefully. I mean, Tank's got to win.
That's the fight the US needs.
By the way, I should correct myself from before. I was talking about no media coverage. I actually do think this weekend there might be some in the Washington Post, because Tank is from Baltimore, which is in the region, and Lamont Roach is from Washington, D.C., and is a reigning world champion defending his title, not to mention the presence of Gary Antoine Russell, who is also from Washington, in a world title fight on that card. So if there's ever a reason for the Washington Post to cover something that's not taking place in Washington or in the region, this would be that type of card, because of the athletes who are participating on the show. As far as Tank taking on Shakur, I mean, he's got to win against Roach. That's the fight that Shakur would like. But that fight will only happen if somebody can convince both sides to do it for whatever the amount of money is. Obviously, Turki Al-Sheikh wields a lot of control and power these days. He's obviously been involved now with Shakur because of the relationship with Matchroom Boxing, but hasn't really been involved with anything related to Tank. But at the end of the day, money talks, and if they offer him a big enough package to his team, I do think it's possible. It is. I'll say this: to me, it's the most significant fight that you can make in the sport between American champions.
Yeah,
Shakur and Tank both have world titles in a historic division like lightweight, and that's a big time fight. Very different styles, very different kind of personalities, and that if they actually made that match and put that here in the United States, there would be a lot of business for a fight like that, in my opinion.
well, especially with the Ring magazine now as well, with Turkey Al Sheikh. They're not just out with Riyadh season. We've got that show in New York with Haney and Garcia and Martin Bacoli, it looks like. The Ring Magazine will be doing a lot more shows. So hopefully, like, we can see more shows out in the US in terms of putting the Tank Davises and the Shakur Stevensons together. Because again, that fight there, I think the lightweight division should be the best division in boxing right now, with Tank Davis, Shakur Stevenson, Lomachenko if he comes back from injury, Keyshawn Davis. I mean, those names. Can you imagine a little four-man tournament just with those guys? I mean, that excites me because of the skill set, the boxing IQ, just everything that's on
Well,
display.
they also three of those guys have pretty good names, and Keyshawn is on the rise. So yeah,
Yeah.
and then also the same goes for 140, where any of those guys at some point could move up, because in that weight class you'd have Teofimo Lopez and Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney, and we're going to see other fights that we just, not that it's at that level of name recognition, but Catterall fought, Barbosa fought. You've got those types of fighters that are maybe not with huge names, but certainly can be competitive in those fights. So there's a lot of good fighters between 35 and 40 that can make very interesting fights for years to come. But the biggest fight among them is probably Shakur against Tank, certainly at 135.
Definitely. Quick one on Shakur then against Josh Padley. Do you think Shakur maybe could have done more, or do you think that is just that was just Shakur just having fun in there?
I don't know if it's a matter of him having fun in there, although I think he was having fun in there. I think he just did what he was supposed to do. I mean, I don't think there's any time that Shakur goes into a fight where people are anticipating or expecting, a second round knockout. No, he broke the guy down, who took the fight on short notice, but was in good shape. I mean, I don't know if Padley had been in the gym training for something else, but it wasn't like he just showed up and was pretty clear he wasn't in any kind of condition. He was definitely in shape. And he took the fight on short notice. Shakur was changing opponents on short notice, completely different type of fighter than Schofield. Shakur probably lost the first round, maybe. I don't remember what the official card said. I think he lost the first round on at least one scorecard. Anyway, the point is, that wasn't because it was Padley doing anything spectacular. That was Shakur doing what Shakur does, which is see what he's got in front of him, sort of, take a look at him, gauge the speed, gauge the power, gauge the range, all that. And then after, they won every round and then knocked him out with a massive body attack. So I'm not really sure, what else could he have done? Knock him out a couple of rounds earlier, I guess. I mean, I guess it's possible, but that's Shakur Stevenson. It's not a puncher. I mean, I covered the entirety of Floyd Mayweather's career. He had a ton of fights that he was in with guys who were lesser than him, and he went the distance with, but he was brilliant. He won every single round, and Shakur basically did the same thing, but he got the stoppage in the 9th round. So I don't think there's much to complain about. It wasn't a thrilling fight, but Shakur fights just aren't generally thrilling. But at the end of the day, people want to see knockouts. And what did he do? He got a knockout.
Yeah, that's a fair point, definitely. Now, Dan, I do want to get your thoughts on Turkey Al Sheikh saying putting on fights, Times Square with Garcia and Haney, and then he was talking about having a fight on Alcatraz. I mean, you've been in boxing long enough, and we were talking about the egg situation. You've never seen that before, but we've never seen fights on Times Square, Alcatraz, and all these unique world places. I mean, your thoughts on that, man? As an American, having these mega fights in these unique American landmarks, surely that excites you.
Well, first of all, I don't view the double header between Haney and I mean, it's not like Haney and Garcia are fighting each other in Times Square. They're tune-up fights against reasonable opponents, but not those bouts of themselves are not mega fights. But certainly, you put it in Times Square if they can pull that off in terms of logistics and zoning and costs. I mean, I'm still not 100% convinced that will actually happen in Times Square. There's a lot that has to go into that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but before I really delve into it, let's actually see them have a press conference, announce the particulars, and that it's actually going to be there, or maybe it'll be some other location in the New York area. That would be obviously a different situation. But yeah, that'd be cool. Don't get me wrong. If they can pull it off, more power to them. Alcatraz, I don't really quite get that one. I mean, that you're basically saying we don't want to have any fans there because you got to get everybody on a boat from San Francisco to go to an island. I can't imagine that if they could have people there, that the capacity would be more than what? I mean, a few hundred or a couple thousand. I mean, again, it's a cool idea, but that one I was sort of like, I don't get that one. What's the purpose? It's not like Teofimo, who is the person they're talking about fighting in Alcatraz. He has no relation to the region. He's not from California. He's certainly not from the San Francisco area. He doesn't have an opponent yet. I mean, again, I'm not knocking thinking outside the box, but that one just felt a little bit weird to me.
It's definitely intriguing with this boxing game. Like I said, I've not been in it as long as you, Dan. I'm not trying to out your age here, but I've not been in the I've not been reporting on boxing for as long as you. So it is unique times, I think, that we're living in terms of what's happening right now, because we all get to see that back in the 80s we saw the best fight the best. We've seen Sugar Ray Leonard, Duran, Hagler, Hearns fight each other like that. Do you know what I mean? Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, and Sonny Liston, and all these guys. And then it became in boxing where it was almost difficult to get the mega fights that we were after. But now
Well,
it's
don't I don't want you looking at it in rose-colored glasses. It's
mm,
not like when Sugar Ray Leonard was making the deal to fight Marvin Hagler was easy. That was one of
no.
the hardest deals in the history of boxing to make, and it didn't happen until the very end of Hagler's career. They had, Hagler had been calling out Ray for years and left at the altar multiple times. So I know that the fights ultimately happened, but none of these fights were ever easy to make. It's not like they snapped their fingers in 1985 and the best guys fought the best guys, and now they don't. The reality is, throughout the history of boxing, it's always been complicated to make the biggest and the best fights. Now, maybe it was more frequent at that time because there was, first of all, there was more names. Boxing was more popular. But today, yes, it's a pain in the ass a lot of times. But the best guys eventually do fight each other for the most part. We have seen plenty of, particularly now that the Saudis are involved. I mean, over the last year and a half, is there a heavyweight fight other than Fury Joshua that has gone unmade since their involvement? And I still think there's a good chance we'll see Fury against Joshua if Turkey gets his way. I don't think anybody truly believes that Mr. Fury is done for good, and that's a fight that Joshua just said last week when he was discussing it on the Better BF Bevo event that he still wants that fight. So the biggest fights do happen. It's always going to take time. You're never going to satisfy every fan and have them say that they snap their fingers and we get the fight we want at that exact moment we want it. That's not, forget about boxing. That's not life. It just doesn't happen in real life like that.
Well, see, that's why I talked to you. I wasn't born. I was just born back in the 80s, Dan. I never knew about the ins and outs. I just enjoyed the fights when I was a kid growing up.
I'm going to give you a suggestion. I'll say this to all boxing fans who are interested in, particularly in those four Kings fights of Duran and Leonard and Hagler and Hearns, is go out there and either, go to your library, buy it. It's a fantastic, probably the best boxing book I've read. It's The Four Kings by the late, great George Kimball, who was a good friend of mine for many years, who wrote boxing for the Boston Herald, who covered all 9 of their fights at ringside and wrote the definitive history of that. And in that book about the fights, besides just the combat, is a lot of material about making those deals and the complications that went along with it. It's a fantastic book, well worth the time, well worth the money. Again, it will point you in the direction and show you how these mega fights were made in the 1980s and a lot of the business stuff that went on. And it is not that much different than what goes on today. It's just that they weren't taking place in the Middle East.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to get on that. That's quite interesting. I'm going to put that in my little man cave, I think, because I don't have
Great
that.
book.
Yeah,
Fantastic book.
I'm going to. Hopefully, it's on Amazon. I'll go on my Amazon right now and see if Amazon Prime and see if I
It's
can.
there. You can buy it.
I'll get it. I'm going to get it, and I'll send you a screenshot.
I'm going to tell you one thing about that book. I keep a copy of that book in my nightstand. I have a lot of boxing books, and I've got like shelves of boxing books, but they're not next to my bed.
Yeah.
When I open up my nightstand, I keep that book there, and I read sections of it on a regular basis. Like if I'm in the mood for like Leonard Hagler, I just go to Leonard Hagler chapter. If I'm interested in Hearns and Leonard, I can go to the chapter on their 2 fights. I'm just making the point that that's how much I think of that book and how much I love that era and how much I love those fights.
Definitely. I love that era. I didn't see the era. I just seen it as I was coming through as a young fighter and enjoying the boxing fights. But yeah, I'm gonna get on that book, Four Kings by George Kimball, you said?
George Kimball, yes, sir.
George Kimball. Dan, listen, as always, I always appreciate your time. We've got 4 minutes left on this Zoom call. Do you have anything else you would like to add to speak to the boxing?
You tell me. What do you want to know? Let's go. Got 4 minutes. We got a little bit. We got a round plus a rest period.
Yeah, we've got 3.5 minutes, right? Let's tell them where they can find you, because I know you have a great Substack like we talk about. You've got a podcast as well for people that don't know. So yeah, just talk a little bit about those things.
Well, the Substack is on you can find it on their website or my website. It's danrafael.substack.com. But the best way to do it is to go on there and punch in your email and sign yourself up and get the email blast of every time I write. Or you can set up a phone alert if you prefer that. It's mostly free, but I have a paid platform, honestly, behind the paywall because we have to pay bills like everybody else in the world. And I'm very appreciative to the folks that have signed up for the paid plan. It's made a huge difference, and I'm actually very fortunate that I can make a living doing that. And you mentioned about the podcast. I do that twice a week with my partner TJ Reeves. We have the Big Fight Weekend podcast that we do every Thursday going into the week, every Thursday night going into the weekend, previewing the weekend. And on Sunday night, we do the one that will go into Monday. That's the recap and all the stuff that happened on the week. That's the Fight Freaks Unite podcast. And I have also plenty of interviews on there. We had, like, just as an example, we had Joe Parker leading into the big show. We had Bivol leading into the big show. I just had Lamont Roach on, who was obviously fighting Trevante Tank Davis on the fight on Saturday. We've had tons of interviews. I had Mike Tyson on before he fought the fight against Jake Paul. I mean, we have interviews on a regular basis. So it's been a lot of fun working on the Substack. I get to be my own boss. It's been awesome doing the podcast. People seem to enjoy it. It's a beautiful thing, Andrew.
Definitely. And like I said, all the links to what you just said, Dan, are always in the description below
I
this
appreciate
video.
it.
So get on it, tap on it, help Dan out where you can and enjoy it. Because like I said, Dan, you don't mince your words, as we say in the UK. You don't mince your words. You say it how it is, and I enjoy it. So as always, thank you so much for your time. And hopefully we can do it again soon when a big fight's announced or a big fight happens. We'll get another chat.
That sounds good.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. Have a good evening,
Yeah.
afternoon. Thank you, mate.